I'm a student from Germany and I came to the UK as a part of my studies to broaden my horizons and gain from a global education. I've learned that the points-based immigration system means only a few will follow in my footsteps. Shouldn't everybody in the 21st century have the freedom to go wherever they want?
The points-based immigration system basically is a system whereby individuals who want to come to the UK to work, study or live are assessed along points. And so basically they're assessed along financial criteria, qualification criteria, and more widely personal criteria, which are it's a very murky zone. Now the other side of the points-based system is that it forces the institutions that want to bring in foreign nationals to study or to work, it forces them to become sponsors. And so it builds up a relationship between sponsors and migrants, whereby the sponsors are responsible for the migrants and they have to monitor them. So they have to monitor their whereabouts, they have to keep information about them, and they have to report them to the UKBA on a regular basis and report any breach of the conditions of the migrant's stay. And it forces the migrant, therefore, to also abide by certain rules, which is very problematic, and which has caused a lot of uprising and a lot of opposition within the academic body.
So my name is James Hayward. I'm the Campaigns and Communications Officer at Goldsmiths Students' Union, and our campaign against the immigration controls, specifically for students, started about 2 years ago with the introduction of the points-based system of immigration, which made it incredibly difficult for international students to come here. And we thought it was racist anyway, the whole treatment of international students as, and in our campaign we called students not suspects, that it was treating students as potential criminals and this type of thing. I could just list so many different countless examples of students who've had problems. It's costing them a fortune. We've got students on PhDs who have to renew their visas and it costs them £300 just to renew it. The new changes that are coming in mean that international students can't work on their campus on certain days. They can't work out of their campus on certain days, and it literally, for me, feels like almost this kind of old-fashioned thing of racist kind of employment. What are we going to have placards on shop windows saying no internationals need apply and this type of thing. I mean, this is what we're facing. It's absolutely outrageous. So really, and the whole thing, what's great about Goldsmiths and great about London, university-wise, is the fact that it's so international, that you've got 4 different continents represented in your seminar group, and that's what's amazing about education here, and that's what makes education fulfilling and interesting. So this is under attack. A lot of the campaigns against it from the National Union of Students and from the education sector have very much been, economically this is bad for the country. Okay, well, fine, whatever, but what's amazing about having education is the international side of it. That's what makes education what it is, and why we're so good at education in Britain anyway, because of the international contribution to it. So that side of this is being ignored, and this is what we're fighting for. We're fighting to defend global education. I don't just want to learn about what happens in England. I want to know what's happening all around the world. I want to hear it from people who've lived that culture and that experience. I want to hear it from them as well, and I want to see their research as well. This is being destroyed by these immigration changes. All they want to do is study here. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a very good thing. Yet they're being denied this, or it's being made very difficult for them, or they're even being criminalised for doing it. I might one day want to go and study in another country, and that should be fine, right? I mean, I don't see why it's ever an issue that we can't have people going to different countries to study. And one of the worst things we're finding with our work here is over the criminalisation of students. We called our campaign Students Not Suspects, precisely because one of the new changes is that all the attendance, which is noted down by staff here for lectures and seminars, then has to be passed on to the UK Border Agency, who then monitor it. And I think it's 10 times, if students are absent for 10 times, then the UK Border Agency has the right to withdraw their visa and deport them, which is absolutely outrageous. So we have a situation now at Goldsmiths where the registration was sent out to all international students by one email to their college email accounts, which of course not everyone checks, not everyone has access to all the time. And if students haven't responded to that by a certain time, then they're going to be sent to the border agency, and basically, effectively, they will withdraw their visas. There's 150 Goldsmiths students who haven't been able to respond to this email. They have, I'm talking to you now, 2 days from now, to respond to that email, otherwise their details are going to be sent to the border agency. And this is exactly what we warned when we protested about right at the beginning when this points-based stuff was introduced, that this was completely, it was leaving everything to chance, everything was going to be arbitrary, that a student could be deported over the most smallest of thing. You know, it's what we warned about from the beginning. We're now in a situation where, as I said, over 100 students could be deported over not responding to an email, which is absolutely disgraceful.
The points-based immigration system is also supposed to enable the UKBA and the office to shut down certain of their offices, certain of the application offices around the world, if they think there is reason to believe that a fraud is happening or abuses are happening. So, for example, for over 9 months between 2009 and 2010, all applications from Nepal, Bangladesh and northern India were shut down because the UKB and the Home Office had suspicions that a rise in bogus applicants through the dependence route were happening, so that a lot of people were basically marrying in order to get those visas. And that's kind of the thing that's very interesting about the points-based immigration system, is it's a prime example of what happens when basically politics is really narrowed down to a management exercise that tries to reach a zero risk level. And because you want to take absolutely no risk, you shut down things. You kind of preempt.
I am particularly interested in the fact how this invades university life and our everyday freedoms, and this really changes how we view people and students. So what do you think about this, and could you give us the facts about the monitoring requirements?
Of course. So the monitoring requirements have also changed over time, because different kind of sponsorship statuses were incorporated. So whereas before there was one general sponsor status, now we have what is called a highly trusted sponsored status. And under the highly trusted sponsor system, institutions, universities have to basically check the attendance of their international students 3 times a year. So there will be 3 points during the year where they will ask students to come in with their passports and their visas and basically, you know, sign up a paper and say, I'm still here, I'm still studying, I still live under this address, etc. That is the basic requirements. But the thing is, because they're also asked to make sure that students, international students, comply with the conditions of their visas, they have to keep monitoring students throughout the year. So they have to make sure that students do not exceed the number of hours that they're allowed to work. They have to make sure that students do not move, and they have to make sure that students behave in a way that is in keeping with what is expected of them. And that is the more shady area. Because if you have suspicions that somebody might be conducting terrorist activities or illegal activities, you have to report them to the UKBA. And in a climate where sponsors can be withdrawn their license if they're not complying with their requirements, and that basically means losing the ability of welcoming international students, considering how much income international students bring in and how much universities rely on that, it makes them very nervous and very eager to comply with the requirements. So you can assume that certain universities and the management of certain universities will be more stringent with applying the monitoring. And it is actually the case. So some universities have implemented systems which are far beyond what the UKBA expects of them. So some universities are applying, are using basically identity card systems, what is called in certain cases uni nanny. So each student And most of the times they've had to expand that to all the entire student body in order not to breach equality laws, basically. So some universities use these ID cards, which students either swipe at a terminal or emit a radio frequency which is picked up by a central system. So basically, it works like the clocking system that existed in industries during the Industrial Revolution. So you basically clock in and clock out. So they know when you're on campus, and they can even track you around campus. So it inserts a really odd surveying CCTV remnant system in an environment which has traditionally been an environment where the state and the police does not enter, and where that surveilling mentality does not exist. Traditionally, academia and campuses have been places of free speech and places where a lot of people came to speak about issues which were too controversial to speak of in the public space. But now that mentality is gone and has been replaced by a mentality which is exactly the same, that permeates throughout the UK public space. And so basically it has imposed a very suspicious, untrusting culture on staff which need the trust relationship to work, because that is part and parcel of the relationship that exists between academics, generally the academic staff, and the student staff.
I think, don't we need a certain amount of bureaucracy?
Yes, we need a certain amount of bureaucracy for the social state to work, but we want that bureaucracy to exist within a framework where the state and the citizens who live in this country have a trust relationship. And we don't want this to exist as it is increasingly existing within a framework where the state is necessarily suspicious, concerned of the citizens, and thus the bureaucracy becomes an apparatus to survey, to check, to categorize, and to evaluate citizens and residents. And that is what is happening. And that is why the points-based immigration system is such a good, for us, campaigning issue, because it embodies all these issues. It embodies this movement towards less trust between the state and individuals.
It has often been claimed that the points-based system protects the UK from terrorists. And the main argument is that we only have finite provision, so we cannot provide it to anyone. What do you think about this?
It's a very dangerous idea, because you start with a certain category of people which you will accuse of stealing and abusing these finite resources. And so basically, those people or generally international students have gone from being a great resource, financially, culturally, socially, humanely, to being potential abusers, to being systematic abusers, because they stay in this country, they breathe you air, take your space, take your jobs. So that ideological shift has happened, and it's very dangerous. So if that category of people is seen as doing that, there is nothing to say that this mentality won't be extended to other categories of people. People who are without a job because they want to or because they can't find a job. Mothers who are not working. I mean, what is to say that this kind of automatic suspicion will not extend to other categories of people? Nothing. And that is the thing that is very dangerous and very worrying. It fits into an ideological scenario where states and politicians want citizens to get used to the fact that the state will provide them with less because it is not willing to do as much as it has done before.
What do you think about the fact that the points-based system, for instance, or the state, says to people, you can't come here and you are not allowed to go there? What do you think about this?
I think as a human being, my deep conviction is if I am allowed to travel and if I have had the fortune to live in different countries, in different continents, I would like everyone to have that possibility. So my deep conviction is that I'm for the freedom of movement, especially because it is already the reality for so many people. I am half French, half German. I was born in yet another country. I've lived in at least 5 countries by now. My partner is from a completely different culture altogether. We still haven't gotten to that place where we really truly live in a globalized state, even though that has been the history of the human race.
Have you had any experience of difficulties for universities and professors coming to the UK and work with you?
Absolutely. We've had a couple of cases recently that I've been involved in where fantastic, brilliant scholars from overseas have not been able to get into the country because of the visa restrictions to come here to teach. So in a sense, the kind of intellectual capital, the intellectual quality of the British University, which has always been dependent on scholars from all over the world, brilliant insights and brilliant minds from every corner of the globe, are finding it increasingly difficult to come to Britain to work, to enrich the British University.
I've learned that the new visa regulations means that you as a professor of academia have to kind of monitor your students, and for me this is also a kind of very worrying point. And because universities must now become a sponsor of the UK border agency, and I'm really interested if Goldsmith is doing this, and what do you think about the point that students, that you as a professor have to kind of work as an extended arm of the UK border agency?
Well, I think there's the university and university teachers shouldn't be border agents. I think that kind of damages what's precious about the university as a place of encounter, as a kind of cosmopolitan space in which, you know, people's imaginations can be freed. You can't think in a climate of fear.
So I could imagine this really harms the relationship between students and professors.
You're absolutely right. The danger is that it kind of puts a line or a wedge of fear and anxiety and suspicion, which I think corrodes our intellectual life. That actually what this is doing in a time of financial constraint when the university is under pressure, it is limiting our capacity to be the masters of our own future. It's confining the interests actually and the opportunities and the strategies that we need to develop in order for the British University to have a robust future. You know, so I think that's the way that the argument needs to be made, in my view. You know, that it just doesn't make any sense. You know, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, every year when I stand in front of, you know, the new intake of MPhil PhD students, as I did this year, you look around that room and you realise that actually what's special about those people in that room is that they do represent a kind of cosmopolitan global intelligence. Not only in financial terms, but intellectual terms too. Yeah. You know, in order to make sure, or in order to ensure that the university, the British University, is a place where, you know, excellence and creativity, original thinking can be fostered, you know.
Going back to the points-based system, and it seems that this really categorizes and calculates human, on one hand, which tiers they fit in, and I think it's very worrying because you always have a separation in the points-based system. You have international students, European students, non-European students, then you always have a kind of separation between how much money they pay. So this really kind of is really worrying. So what do you think about this fact that it really categorizes and calculates humans?
Well, I think that one of the things that I think is dangerous about the points-based system is that it becomes a device through that kind of mobile, globally mobile, intelligent population is being sifted, categorised. You know, some people pass through that sift, some people don't.
Yeah, and it seems for me like you have kind of people who deserve to study and some people who are not deserve to study, and it's really worrying. Moreover, I read a Guardian article of you, and you stated that deportation become normalized and has become an instrument of European immigration policy. And you're also talking about managed migration. Yeah. Could you tell more about this and a little bit more in detail?
So those people who can move and are being encouraged to move are often highly skilled migrants and people with enough money and resources to move. So we have a kind of a global elite that can move across the borders of countries on a global scale. And those people who are being held in place, who are the poor. And I think that's one of the sort of, the bureaucracies in a sense hide or try and nuance that fact, you know. So we're living in a world where there are fractions of the global population who can move and vast numbers of the human population on a global scale who cannot move, who are trapped, who are held. So I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. And I think students, in a sense, are between those two categories. They're in an ambivalent, sort of shaded space between those two.
Yeah, and I would say you also have a shift from kind of, it used to be about talent. You can go to university if you have talent and if you want to learn something. And now it seems for me it's more about your belongings and your money that you have. How would you comment on this?
Yeah, I think that's partly about money, but I think it's also partly about how the society sees what is valuable.
Yeah.
How the society sees what is valuable, ultimately, at the end of the day. And I think the life of the mind and the importance of thinking is besieged in our time. And we have to have a much more robust sense of the value of learning and thinking, and actually of the university itself.
Yeah.
And also, I think we have to, the university is a place to question ignorance, to think carefully, and to pay attention to the world in a way that is important for us to really develop, a sense of a future. To figure out what the big questions are, not only of today but of tomorrow, and also to reflect on the kinds of answers that we might be able to imagine.